It is a truth universally acknowledged, if one may so pilfer from the inimitable Miss Austen, that a letter never posted invariably occasions more disturbance than one dispatched with ruthless punctuality. Such a principle had not, however, received its due philosophical treatment in the slim volumes of the Reverend Simon Pettigrew, whose works on ecclesiastical history were considered by the entire diocese of Crampton-le Marche to be models of orthodoxy and unendurable dullness. It was the good clergyman himself who, with hands still scented faintly of paraffin from his morning bout with the vestry lamp, stumbled upon the thing that would set the placid Norfolk village of Fleckney St. Agnes into a discreet but undeniable uproar. It was a damp Thursday in early October, the kind of day on which the mist hangs low over the fens like a mourner's veil, and the geese honk balefully at passing cyclists. Lord Peter Wimsey, who had come to Fleckney on what he referred to as a brief rustic exile, in search of unadulterated Norfolk dumplings and the kind of sherry that tastes faintly of varnish, was comfortably ensconced at the Swan and Angel public house when the news reached him. Mr. Pettigrew, white-faced and twitching with the pleasing horror of a man who finds himself for the first time in life's more lurid headlines, had rushed into the snug at precisely 11 minutes past 11, still clutching the offending envelope between fingers not quite steady. "I say," remarked Lord Peter, looking up from a glass of rather doubtful port and a local paper whose leading item concerned a prize marrow. "You have the air of a man who has either witnessed an apparition or stumbled upon a bishop in negligee. Which is it?" The rector gulped. "A terrible business, my lord, dreadful. You must come at once. The hall, it's Miss Wilbraham. She's dead." "Dead?" Wimsey raised an eyebrow. "Good heavens! I'd no notion she was even unwell. It appears murder," Pettigrew whispered, with the unctuous relish of one unaccustomed to such exotic vocabulary. Wimsey set down his glass with the precise care of a man unwilling to be accused of waste, even in extremis. "Murder, dear man, in Fleckney St. Agnes. What next? Moon worship? Ritual sacrifice? It's positively un-English. Do have a seat." "But, my lord, we must—" Yes, of course," said Wimsey, rising with the air of one graciously consenting to attend an amateur theatrical. "A murder does rather throw off one's plans for a quiet morning. Fetch my hat, Bunter." The immaculately composed Bunter, who had been perusing the Times obituary column with his customary professional interest, rose smoothly. "Very good, my lord." As they made their way across the green towards Wilbraham Hall, Wimsey fell into a reflective silence, his long figure sauntering with the deliberate ease of one who never permits haste to impede style. The hall itself, a brooding Jacobean edifice in weathered brick and sagging gables, squatted behind its gates with the morose dignity peculiar to old houses conscious of their own historical anecdotes. It was the sort of place in which one might reasonably expect a murdered gentlewoman to be discovered, and Wimsey, noting the mist curling about the chimneys like a weary stage effect, murmured, "We want only a banshee's wail and a gouty colonel with a silver-headed cane to complete the picture." Inside, the hall was dim, the heavy curtains drawn against the dismal weather. The air smelled faintly of beeswax, with an insistent undercurrent of something less wholesome. Dr. Ellicombe, the village physician, waited in the library, his expression solemn and his cuffs meticulously starched. "Foul business," he began as Wimsey entered. "The housekeeper found her this morning in the study, a clean puncture to the base of the skull, no sign of forced entry. It seems planned." Wimsey inspected the room with a languid eye, pausing to adjust a crooked Chinese figurine on the mantelpiece. "One does dislike a cluttered crime scene," he murmured. "And what, pray, is this I hear about a letter?" Pettigrew, who had followed them in, proffered the envelope with trembling fingers. "I found it on the vicarage path, just by the lich gate. It's addressed to— Well, see for yourself." Wimsey took the letter and studied the neat, rather crabbed hand. The address read, "To be delivered only in case of my death. Miss Eugenia Wilbraham, Wilbraham Hall, Fleckney St. Agnes." The envelope bore no seal, and the flap was unfastened. "My dear rector," said Wimsey, regarding the two men with sudden brightness, "you realize, of course, that this changes everything?" He tucked the letter into his breast pocket with delicate care. "Now then," said Lord Peter, his tone light but his eyes sharpening, "let's see what the corpse can tell us before the usual— Respectable souls come bustling in to tidy away the more interesting irregularities. And with that, he strolled into the study where Miss Eugenia Wilbraham's lifeless form awaited him, her expression frozen in what appeared to be an expression of mildly affronted surprise, one eyebrow, as if on cue, arched with lingering disdain. Wimsey smiled and murmured to himself, "Dying, it seems, does little to improve one's manners." The housekeeper, Mrs. Fenchurch, was a woman of uncertain years and formidable presence, with the kind of solid, uncompromising figure that suggested a long and unbroken acquaintance with suet puddings. She met Lord Peter at the threshold of the study, her hands clenched so tightly in her apron that the knuckles gleamed like small, obstinate pearls. "I said at the time, my lord," she began, in a voice pitched somewhere between outraged propriety and imminent collapse. "I said to Miss Wilbraham only last week, I did, that these goings-on would bring no good. It's not for the likes of me to speak out, but I know what I know." "And a capital maxim it is, Mrs. Fenchurch," murmured Wimsey, doffing his hat and handing it with idle precision to Bunter. "A wise woman never commits her knowledge to the air, lest it come back altered. Still, since Miss Wilbraham is, alas, beyond earshot, perhaps you might hazard a confidence or two to a humble peer of the realm." The housekeeper wavered, torn between instinctive deference and a lifetime of discretion. At length, she cast a hunted look towards the study door, where Dr. Ellicombe's bulky form hovered like a disapproving sentinel. "It's not for me to speak ill of the dead," she murmured, in the time-honored formula that invariably precedes precisely that act. "But there was things, my lord, things that wasn't usual." Wimsey's eyes gleamed. "So much of life isn't. Permit me to be tediously precise." "What things?" Mrs. Fenchurch hesitated. "Odd visitors, my lord, mostly in the evenings. Never by the front, always the side path, and Miss Wilbraham herself opening the door. Though what for, heaven alone knows. I saw a tall gentleman once, black coat, foreign sort of look about him. Couldn't see the face clear. Always kept to the shadows. And then there's that room." Wimsey's brows rose. "A room, Mrs. Fenchurch? This is positively Gothic. Which room?" She glanced once more at the physician, who had the decency to retreat into the hallway. "The East Wing study, my lord. Locked since Master Simon and her brother and died. None of us allowed in there, not for years, but of late, lights at odd hours, footsteps, and she was forever writing letters and then burning them in the grate." "Letters?" Wimsey repeated, with apparent irrelevance, adjusting a picture frame on the wall until it hung straight. "Now that's a habit with literary overtones. Shelley did much the same, I fancy, though the consequences were generally limited to verse. Did anyone else in the house comment on these peculiarities?" Mrs. Fenchurch pursed her lips. "Well, the maids talk as maids will. Lucy says she heard voices arguing though no visitor was ever announced. And poor old Boggis, the gardener, swears he saw a light flashing from the old summer-house by the orchard. Middle of the night it was." "A veritable hotbed of intrigue," Wimsey murmured approvingly. "And what, pray, was the esteemed Miss Wilbraham's general disposition of late?" The housekeeper hesitated, then delivered her verdict in a single leaden phrase. "Fretful, my lord, nervy, if you take my meaning, jumping at shadows." "Curious," Wimsey said lightly. "One would expect the oppressor to sleep the sounder of the two, but the annals of crime are filled with exceptions." He turned to Bunter, who had remained impassively silent. "Bunter, make a note. Interrogate house staff individually. No overlapping testimonies. And have a look at that East Wing room, if you please." "Very good, my lord." At that moment, a discreet cough announced the arrival of Inspector Moffat, a square-jawed, stolid man whose chief distinction lay in his unwavering belief that no crime was ever committed by anyone with an income exceeding $800 per annum. "Mornin', my lord," Moffat said, eyeing Wimsey with a blend of suspicion and reluctant admiration. "I'd be obliged if you'd leave the matter in the hands of the proper authorities this time." Wimsey beamed. "Delighted, dear fellow. Merely indulging my harmless fancies. Have you yet formed a theory?" Moffat's brow furrowed. "Well, can't see past young Julian Fanshawe if you want the truth. Quarrelled with the deceased 3 nights ago. The whole village knows it. Something about a trust fund she was withholding." "Ah," said Wimsey, eyes brightening. "Money. the motive universal, and where might this combustible youth be found? Down at the Boar's Head, so they tell me. Drowning his conscience, no doubt. Excellent, Whimsy murmured. A fellow who drinks publicly in the face of guilt is either remarkably innocent or criminally incompetent. Either way, instructive. Shall we pay him a call, Bunter? Indeed, my lord. As they stepped back into the grey October air, Whimsy paused, taking a deep breath of mist-laden damp and glancing up at the sagging gables of Wilbraham Hall. Curious thing, Bunter, he said reflectively. The dead tell no tales, and yet one invariably finds they've left the house littered with little souvenirs of the unsaid. I shall be most interested to see what this particular corpse has omitted. And with that, they made their way towards the Boar's Head, while the mists thickened about the village like the closing curtain on an ill-lit stage. The Boar's Head, a low-beamed coaching inn with ceilings seemingly designed for men of Napoleonic stature and a profusion of brass implements polished to a belligerent gleam, was as much a fixture of Fleckney St. Agnes as the church steeple, and twice as communicative. Lord Peter, ducking beneath a rogue beam that had claimed many a taller stranger's dignity, cast an appreciative glance at the heavy settle by the fire, where a gaunt greyhound slumbered in that peculiar state of boneless contentment native to dogs and dowagers. The landlord, one Josiah Beckwith, had the impassive look of a man for whom scandal was as regular as the post. He bobbed a deferential nod. "Morning, my lord." "Inspector's been in already. That Fanshawe lad's back in the snug. Been at the bitter since breakfast." "Industrious fellow," murmured Whimsy, accepting a glass of indifferent sherry with a gracious nod. "Would you be so good as to leave us to our mutual lamentations?" Beckwith, comprehending the etiquette of aristocratic inquiry, vanished discreetly. Whimsy gestured to Bunter, who assumed a post by the door with the unobtrusive air of a man who might or might not be listening to everything within a 3-yard radius. The snug was a narrow room with a low window looking onto the green, the diamond panes filmed with mist. In the corner, a young man slouched in the peculiar attitude of the seriously hungover, one booted foot extended, collar askew, eyes shadowed and bloodshot. His hair, a dark untidy mop, fell over a brow furrowed by either guilt or defiance. Julian Fanshawe was the last of the Fanshawes of Cullingford Priory, a lineage whose descent from the Conqueror was rivaled only by its capacity for ruinous litigation and the occasional public scandal. Whimsy recalled a duel in 1789 and a notorious elopement with a fortune-teller somewhere in the Regency. The boy had the look of his line, reckless, proud, and deeply inconvenient. Whimsy slid into the chair opposite with a smile that hovered between sympathy and irony. "I understand, Mr. Fanshawe," he began lightly, "that you and Miss Wilbraham had something of a dispute." Fanshawe's lips curled in a tight, bitter line. "Did she send you? Or is this part of the official inquisition?" "Merely a gentlemanly curiosity," Whimsy assured him. "I've a taste for unhappy families. They're invariably more illuminating than happy ones." Fanshawe let out a sharp, humourless laugh. "And which do you suppose we are? My dear fellow, no supposition needed." There was a pause. The greyhound in the bar emitted a sigh. "She ruined me," Fanshawe said abruptly. "Damn her! She knew what she was doing. The Wilbraham Trust and my grandfather's money. I had a right to it, or would have, if the old witch hadn't twisted the trustees around her finger. She swore I was unstable, unreliable. God knows what lies she told them. And did you in consequence threaten her life in a floridly public manner 3 nights ago?" Fanshawe's gaze did not waver. "Yes, I told her I wished she were dead. I may even have said I'd do it myself." "Ah," said Whimsy amiably. "And where were you between 9 and 11 last night, when Miss Wilbraham was, so to speak, otherwise engaged?" Fanshawe hesitated, then scowled. "Here, drinking, ask Beckwith." Whimsy inclined his head. "I shall. One more thing, Mr. Fanshawe. Are you in the habit of writing anonymous notes?" The young man looked genuinely startled. "What? No, what sort of rot is this?" "Merely a passing thought," Whimsy said smoothly. "Though you might be amused to learn that a letter was found this morning, addressed by Miss Wilbraham's own hand and marked for delivery in the event of her death. The effect was immediate." Fanshawe paled visibly, a fine sheen of sweat appearing at his temple. "I swear," he muttered. "Whatever's in it?" "I didn't." "I was angry, yes. But you can't think—" "My dear Mr. Fanshawe," Whimsy said gently, "I make it a rule never to think. It is a habit most injurious to the digestion. I prefer instead to observe." He rose, brushing a trace of dust from his sleeve. "Thank you for your candor. Should you recall any unposted letters, mysterious visitors, or inconvenient alibis, do favor me with a word." Fanshawe's expression darkened, but he said nothing as Whimsy withdrew. Out in the bar, Beckwith polished a tankard with unnecessary vigor. "He's been here since 7, my lord," he said quietly. "Hasn't left the place, I'd swear to it." "Most obliging," murmured Whimsy. "Your sherry, however, remains indefensible." As they stepped back into the thickening mist, Bunter at his side, Whimsy paused at the lich gate. "A red herring, Bunter." "Indeed, my lord?" "Fanshawe. Far too obvious, far too dramatic. Villains of his stripe always leave evidence resembling monogrammed cufflinks and footprints in soft wax. No, our fish swims deeper." He drew out the letter once more, gazing at the careful spidery hand. "To be delivered only in case of my death. Well, Eugenia, old girl, I rather fancy we'd better see what else you neglected to post." And with that, they turned back toward Wilbraham Hall, the mist swallowing their retreating figures like a theatre curtain falling upon the first act. Wilbraham Hall, when viewed in the sullen light of late afternoon, had acquired the air of a house beginning to suspect it might be murdered next. The mists clung more thickly now, seeping into corners and creeping along the flagstones like a conspirator's cloak. Lord Peter, with his customary disregard for atmospheric portent, whistled a fragment of Purcell's Cold Song as he crossed the threshold once more. Dr. Ellicombe met him in the hallway, moustaches bristling. "You've seen Fanshawe, then?" "I have, dear doctor. Positively reeking of innocence, more of brandy and bad judgment, which in some circles is much the same thing." "Confounded young scoundrel," muttered the physician. "If he's not guilty, I'll eat my hat." Whimsy's eyes twinkled. "A noble wager. May I recommend a light bechamel for the lining? Felt can be frightfully coarse on the digestion." He passed on without waiting for a reply, beckoning Bunter behind him. The housekeeper materialized from a side passage like a reproachful wraith. "Mrs. Fenchurch," said Whimsy, "I find myself consumed by a sudden morbid interest in furnishings. Might I prevail upon you for a list of alterations to the house within the last year?" The woman blinked. "Alterations, my lord? Why, none to speak of. Not a curtain replaced, a carpet relaid, a clock shifted, a bell rope rehung." Mrs. Fenchurch pursed her lips. "Well, the library clock, my lord. The old one stopped in June, and Miss Wilbraham had it replaced." "Ah," said Whimsy softly. "And what of the bell to the East Wing study? Does it still function?" "No. My lord disconnected years ago, never repaired." "Excellent. One more question, if I may tax your memory. Was Miss Wilbraham in the habit of receiving correspondence from abroad?" Mrs. Fenchurch frowned. "Not that I recall, my lord. A few letters from a cousin in Leamington, but none foreign." "Curious," murmured Whimsy. "And yet I gather from your previous remarks that a foreign-looking gentleman was seen at the door." "Once," she admitted. "Tall, dark, odd sort of face. Gave me the shivers." "As men in shadows are wont to do," said Whimsy. "Well, I shan't detain you further. Bunter, the East Wing?" They made their way through the dim passage, where ancestral faces leered down from the panelling with a mixture of moral disapproval and faintly racy amusement. The East Wing door was as Mrs. Fenchurch had described, old, with a rusted lock, and an air of resigned neglect. Bunter produced a collection of keys with the solemnity of a priest, unsheathing relics, and after a moment's delicate persuasion, the door yielded. The room beyond was a study, untouched by modernity or good sense. Heavy curtains hung half-drawn, their tassels faded. A monumental desk occupied the center, upon which sat a scattering of papers, a silver inkstand gone dull, and a single dust-filmed photograph in a chased frame. A young man, severe of brow with the peculiar, formal stiffness of late Victorian portraiture. "Simon Wilbraham," murmured Whimsy, inspecting it. "A fellow of fixed opinions, I should think." Bunter, moving with the precision of a chess master in a game only he perceived, examined the hearth. "Recent ashes, my lord." "Indeed." Wimsey crouched, extracting a charred fragment with delicate fingers. Paper, letterhead of some kind, and, what have we here? A corner of a foreign stamp. Our housekeeper's memory grows fallible. "Shall I have it restored, my lord?" "If you please, and while you're about it, inspect the dust upon those window latches. I should be curious to know whether one has been disturbed more recently than its fellows." Bunter inclined his head. "I venture to predict, my lord, that it has." Wimsey's lips twitched. "A betting man would find this case intolerable. The odds shift with each minute." He crossed to the desk, idly sorting. The papers. A will, some estate accounts, a penciled inventory of books. One item, however, drew his eye. A thin, leather-bound volume bearing the title De Occulta Philosophia. "Well, well," murmured Wimsey. Old Simon had a taste for the murky. "Do you suppose, Bunter, that we are to have a hint of necromancy in our little domestic?" "Wouldn't surprise me, my lord. The village speaks of queer tales concerning the family." "They always do," said Wimsey with a sigh. "Every English village is an anthology of unverified scandal. Nevertheless, note it, and have the accounts examined for recent cash withdrawals. Murder, Bunter, is a crime of calculation. Even the lunatic makes a plan." He straightened, the ghost of a smile playing about his lips. "Mark me, Bunter. This business begins to amuse me exceedingly." Outside, the mists pressed closer against the glass, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. Though Wimsey, with his acute ear, noted it was a minute slow, the lingering mist clung to Wilbraham Hall, as if reluctant to release the house's secrets to the plain daylight. Lord Peter, resuming his customary contemplative stride, pondered the curious discrepancies which had begun to emerge like false notes in an otherwise harmonious score. "Bunter," he began, "our timepieces are a most disagreeable puzzle. The church bell, for instance, tolled a full minute late last eve." Bunter, ever meticulous, nodded. "I noted it as well, my lord. Moreover, the grandfather clock in the hall struck the hour at the precise minute. Yet the study clock, replaced, only recently lags by at least 5 minutes. An inconvenience, perhaps, but not a mystery. True, but when one considers the alibi provided by Mr. Fanshawe, his claim to have remained in the Boar's Head between 9 and 11, and the postmark on the unsigned letter, which was allegedly deposited at precisely 10:30 p.m., inconsistencies arise. Go on. The Boar's Head is 2 miles distant from here, a drive of roughly 10 minutes by motorcar, barring any unusual delay. If Fanshawe was drinking there during that hour, and the letter was posted at 10:30, then who delivered? The letter. Wimsey allowed a thin smile to touch his lips. Indeed, Bunter, and to what purpose should an unposted letter be delivered at that precise time? Why should Miss Wilbraham compose such a letter and yet not entrust it to the post herself? The butler, with the solemnity of one conducting a delicate experiment, produced a detailed map of Fleckney St. Agnes and its environs. He pointed to a winding lane leading from the village to the hall service entrance. An unusual route for a postman, my lord. Precisely. And yet, our witness reports the sighting of a man, tall, dark, foreign, on the doorstep. Late last night, Wimsey drew a breath. Who, I wonder, was the intended recipient of that letter? They moved next to the study windows, where Bunter produced a magnifying glass and a fine brush, delicately clearing dust from the latch of the leftmost pane. Recent disturbance here, Bunter confirmed, likely within the last 24 hours. A window left ajar in a house with a murder on its conscience, Wimsey mused, is an invitation or a message, which I cannot yet say. Turning to the fireplace, Wimsey examined the ashes retrieved earlier. Amongst the blackened remnants were tiny fragments of foreign paper, the kind one might expect from a letter or telegram. Curious indeed, Wimsey said softly. The victim's study contains evidence of recent correspondence, foreign, no less, yet no mention has been made of visitors from abroad, save for a ghostly figure seen only by Mrs. Fenchurch. He tapped the photograph on the desk. And Simon Wilbraham's occult interests may have extended beyond mere books. Could the late Miss Wilbraham have been engaged in some clandestine correspondence, perhaps relating to family secrets best kept in shadows? Bunter cleared his throat. "My lord, the village postmaster informs me that no letters were officially dispatched from Wilbraham Hall last night." Wimsey nodded, eyes narrowing slightly. A fact that fits comfortably with the theory that the letter in question was never posted at all. He folded his hands behind his back and regarded the map again. "Our timeline crumbles when scrutinized. Fanshaw's presence at the Boar's Head is supported by witnesses, yet the letter must have been delivered in person to match the postmark's time. Someone then either forged the postmark or manipulated the clocks." The butler raised an eyebrow. "Might I suggest the latter, my lord?" "Indeed, Bunter. And that leads us inevitably to the house itself, its clocks, its doors, and perhaps its inhabitants." Wimsey's gaze drifted toward the eastern wing once more, the room where shadows lengthened and dust settled unevenly. "Tomorrow, we test the house's alibis." He paused, then added with his customary blend of arch amusement and quiet menace, "The devil, as always, is in the details, and I suspect our devil is most meticulous." Outside, the village clock struck, once again several minutes late. The morning mist had lifted with reluctant grace by the time Lord Peter and Bunter returned to Wilbraham Hall. The house, though still draped in an air of weary grandeur, now seemed less a passive setting and more a participant in the unfolding drama, a sombre confidant of whispered secrets and half-forgotten truths. Wimsey found Mrs. Fenchurch in the scullery, carefully polishing a silver salver. The woman's hands trembled ever so slightly, though her face retained the stern composure of one well accustomed to the demands of servitude. "Mrs. Fenchurch," Wimsey began, "I trust you have had a moment to examine the salver that was reported missing." Her eyes flicked momentarily toward the parlour door. "It was found this morning, my lord, beneath a pile of linen in the east wing cupboard. Quite out of place, I must say." "Indeed. And what, if anything, did you notice about it?" She hesitated. "It bore a faint scratch near the edge, like a mark made by a sharp object. A signature, perhaps, or a hurried scrawl." "Could be either, my lord. I did not take it upon myself to investigate further." Wimsey inclined his head. "Prudence, Mrs. Fenchurch, one must know one's station, but I am grateful for your attentiveness." His thoughts drifted, the wheels in his mind turning steadily. The salver's misplacement was no trivial matter. It was a small domestic disturbance with an echo of something far deeper, a disturbance in the orderly surface of the household. Turning his attention toward the library, Wimsey found Lady Wilbraham seated by the fire, a frail figure swathed in black silk, her sharp eyes gleaming with a flicker of defiance. "My lord," she said softly, "you will find that this house holds more than its share of ghosts." "Indeed, madam. Some are quite corporeal, others less so." Lady Wilbraham's gaze fixed on a portrait over the mantelpiece, a stern man with hawkish features and eyes that seemed to follow one about the room. "Simon Wilbraham," she whispered. "My late husband. A man of secrets and shadows. He maintained two lives, as I came to discover, the public, respectable one, and another, hidden even from me." Wimsey's interest piqued. "Do you mean to say he led a double existence?" "Yes," she replied. "There were letters, clandestine meetings. He was involved in certain negotiations, some with parties abroad. Miss Eugenia discovered it only recently. I suspect it shook her more than she would admit." "A revelation of this kind," Wimsey said gently, "has a curious effect on the stability of the mind, particularly when it concerns inheritance, trust, or matters of the heart." Lady Wilbraham nodded. "And the letter found this morning? I believe it relates to those negotiations, but why would Eugenia write such a letter and not send it?" "Perhaps, madam," Wimsey mused, "because she feared the consequences of its delivery, or because the letter was meant to be a safeguard, an insurance against her own untimely demise." Lady Wilbraham's hands trembled slightly as she rose. "The truth is tangled, my lord. I fear that the shadows we see are but the fringes of a far darker tapestry." Wimsey allowed himself a faint smile. "Madame, as the poet says, the devil may care for souls, but he always leaves the threads neatly knotted for a man of reason to untangle." He moved to the window, watching a raven wheeling against the pale sky. The double life of Simon Wilbraham had cast a long shadow, and in its depths lay the heart of the mystery. Bunter joined him silently. My lord, I have made inquiries at the village post office. The reports confirm no letters matching Miss Wilbraham's description were dispatched last night. Yet, the letter exists. An unpublished confession, or perhaps a warning, Wimsey replied. And in that contradiction lies our motive. Shall we confront Lady Wilbraham with this knowledge? Bunter asked. Not yet, Wimsey said, turning with a cryptic smile. Patience, Bunter. The curtain has only just been raised. The actors have taken their places, but the play's denouement remains unwritten. The drawing-room, with its heavy velvet, drapes and glinting brass fixtures, was unusually silent when Wimsey returned after midday. The household was abuzz with speculation, but to Peter, the quiet hum of anxious voices was less important than the sotto voce of shadows dancing in corners. He found Inspector Parker seated by the fireplace, polishing his spectacles with an expression somewhere between impatience and professional despair. Lord Peter, he greeted, I trust your investigations are progressing apace? Indeed, Inspector, though I confess the case has begun to resemble a play with several acts missing. Tell me about it, Parker sighed. Fanshawe is under close watch, naturally. His alibi is paper-thin, but he is as cagey as a fox in a henhouse. Wimsey raised an eyebrow. And yet there is another matter, one that has only just occurred to me. He took a folded piece of parchment from his pocket and laid it on the table. This letter was found not in the post-box, but in an unlikely place. Inspector Parker glanced at the missive, then frowned. What place? Beneath the floorboard in Miss Wilbraham's room. The inspector whistled softly. That's an odd hiding place. Odd, yes, Wimsey agreed. But what interests me is not merely the concealment, but the paper upon which it was written. He tapped the letter. It is watermarked with a local manufacturer's seal, known only to have been used on stationery sold exclusively to one client in the village, one Mrs. Helena Pettigrew, the housekeeper at the vicarage. Mrs. Pettigrew? Parker repeated, surprised. But she claims to know nothing, flatly denies any involvement. Ah, but herein lies our twist, Wimsey said, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Mrs. Pettigrew was seen in the village last night, quite close to Wilbraham Hall, and long after she claimed to have retired to bed. Why would she be lurking there? Parker asked. Motives, Inspector, often stem from buried grievances. And Mrs. Pettigrew is no stranger to such. Some say she harbours a deep resentment toward the Wilbrahams. Old family squabbles, it seems. An angry servant? Parker mused. That's hardly new. No, but this letter suggests a more complicated tale. The handwriting is, in fact, Miss Eugenia's, but the paper is unmistakably Pettigrew's. A collaboration, or perhaps coercion. Wimsey leaned forward, eyes bright. We must revisit all testimonies with care. Even the smallest detail, previously dismissed, may now carry weight. Consider the window left ajar in the East Wing study. Right, said Parker. Mrs. Pettigrew said she checked all windows before retiring, but evidently missed one. Or allowed one to remain open, Wimsey said quietly. I suspect Mrs. Pettigrew's denial is as carefully constructed as the letter's concealment. Bunter entered with a tray of tea, his face composed but eyes alert. My lord, he said, I have also come across something peculiar. The silver salver returned to its place this morning bears a tiny scratch and consistent with a deliberate marking. An identifier, Bunter, someone signaling in code. Wimsey sipped his tea thoughtfully. Inspector, Mrs. Pettigrew is a key figure we must question again. There is a hidden script beneath her calm exterior, and if our letter is a cipher, then we have barely begun to decipher it. The detective rose, the familiar spark of resolve in his gaze. Let us prepare to shine the light on these shadowed corners. The game is afoot, Inspector, and the players less innocent than they first appeared. Outside, the wind stirred the autumn leaves in a restless dance, as if nature itself conspired to conceal the truth. That evening, Wilbraham Hall assumed the solemn stillness of a stage set for a final act, its wood-panelled walls steeped in expectation. Lord Peter, clad in his customary tweed and impeccable tie, moved with quiet authority through the dimly lit corridors, Bunter trailing behind like a faithful understudy. In all my years, Wimsey remarked with a dry smile, I have yet to encounter a household so thoroughly beset by shadows, both literal and metaphorical. One suspects the very walls conspire in silence. Bunter nodded, the faintest smirk betraying his usual stoicism. The assembled household gathered in the library, Lady Wilbraham, Inspector Parker, Mrs. Pettigrew, Fanshawe, and the wary servants, each occupying a seat as though awaiting the commencement of some strange court. Wimsey surveyed the company with an arch glance. "My dear friends, we stand at the crossroads of truth and pretense. Tonight I propose a demonstration, a reenactment of certain events for clarity's sake." A murmur passed among the listeners. Mrs. Pettigrew's fingers tightened around her handkerchief. Fanshawe's jaw stiffened, and Lady Wilbraham's gaze was steady but unreadable. "First," Wimsey continued, "we shall examine the supposed postmark on the letter found concealed beneath the floorboards. This mark, claimed to be from the village post office, is not so simple as it appears." He produced a small brass postmarking device from his pocket, gleaming under the lamplight. A forgery, of course. The letter was never posted. Inspector Parker's eyes narrowed. But who had the means? "Someone with access to the postmark," Wimsey answered, "and the skill to manipulate it. Mrs. Pettigrew, perhaps. Given her knowledge of local deliveries?" The housekeeper paled but said nothing. "Now consider the open window in the east wing study," Wimsey said, moving to the sash and lifting it with a theatrical flourish. This window was left deliberately ajar, not by accident but by design, to suggest forced entry where there was none. He gestured toward Fanshawe, a man who claims to have been elsewhere, yet whose timing cannot be reconciled with the letter's supposed posting. Fanshawe's face darkened. "I've told you all I was at the Boar's Head that night." "True," Wimsey conceded, "but witnesses there only saw you for part of the evening. There remains a suspicious gap." He turned back to the group. "The salver, found with a subtle scratch, was moved to conceal the letter. A signal, perhaps, to those in the know." Bunter stepped forward, demonstrating the precise movements he had observed, the lifting of floorboards, the placing of the letter. As we reenact these moments, the facade cracks. The truth seeks the light. The tension in the room thickened, the assembled faces a tableau of guarded secrets and mounting dread. Wimsey's voice softened, yet remained firm. "There is a double life, a concealed correspondence, and a carefully constructed alibi, all designed to mislead. But human nature is an unruly thing." He fixed Mrs. Pettigrew with a steady gaze. "You have concealed much, madam, but the letter, the postmark, the timing, all betray you." A pause pregnant with unspoken accusation. "I shall return shortly with further revelations," Wimsey declared, stepping away with a courteous nod. As the household dispersed, whispers filled the corners of the library, yet the deepest mysteries remained veiled, waiting for the night's final act. The hour was late, and Wilbraham Hall lay under a thick blanket of fog, muffling the world beyond its heavy stone walls. Lord Peter Wimsey stood alone in the drawing-room, the flicker of the fire casting long dancing shadows that seemed to listen as intently as the assembled company. The household had been summoned once more, summoned to witness the resolution that had eluded them all. Inspector Parker, Lady Wilbraham, Fanshawe, Mrs. Pettigrew, and the rest gathered, their faces taut with anticipation and, in some cases, dread. Wimsey began with his habitual archness, his voice smooth as polished oak. "My dear friends, we have trod a winding path, through concealed letters, deceptive windows, and forged postmarks. The web has been woven tightly, but even the finest silk will unravel before the eye of reason." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle like dust in a sunbeam. "Let us return to the letter itself, that curious missive written by Miss Eugenia Wilbraham. Its contents spoke of a betrayal, a secret kept hidden from all but a few. Yet it was never sent, a fact that in itself is telling." Wimsey's gaze found Mrs. Pettigrew's. "Mrs. Pettigrew, your knowledge of the letter's origin and your access to the postmark allowed you to conceal its existence. Yet it was not you who committed the grievous act." A flicker of surprise crossed the housekeeper's face, quickly masked by a curt nod. "Instead, the culprit is one who sought to protect not only family honor, but a fragile psyche, a man torn between guilt and desperation." He turned to Fanshawe, whose composure had cracked under the weight of scrutiny. "Mr. Fanshawe, your presence at the Boar's Head Tavern was true, but your absence in the crucial hour remains unexplained. Your financial entanglements with the Wilbrahams, your temper with Miss Eugenia, and your knowledge of her secret correspondence gave you motive." Fanshawe's jaw clenched, but whimsy was relentless. The letter's concealment beneath the floorboards, the scratched salver signaling its location, and the open window meant to suggest forced entry. All these were calculated to mislead. "But why?" Fanshawe's voice was raw. "Why go to such lengths?" "Because the letter threatened to expose a truth far more devastating than mere infidelity or debt," Whimsy explained. "A truth about identity." He paused, letting a small dramatic smile curl his lips. Miss Eugenia Wilbraham was not, in fact, the daughter of Simon and Lady Wilbraham. She was the child of a clandestine liaison, a secret carefully protected by those in power, including yourself, Fanshawe. A collective gasp filled the room. The letter was her confession and a plea for understanding. You, caught between loyalty and self-interest, chose to silence her rather than allow the scandal to surface. Fanshawe's shoulders sagged. "I did what I thought was right." "Ah, but in such matters," Whimsy said quietly, "right and wrong become threads of the same tangled skein." Turning to Inspector Parker, Whimsy concluded, "You will find the evidence you require in the recently discovered ledger, the details of payments, coded and concealed, that tie Fanshawe irrevocably to this tragedy." The inspector nodded, already reaching for his notebook. Whimsy's eyes swept the room one last time. "The truth is never as simple as it seems. It is a knot of human frailty, guilt, and desperate hope." As silence fell, Fanshawe's resolve broke. "I confess, I did not mean to kill her. It was an accident. An accident born of fear," Whimsy murmured, "and now justice shall take its course." The room, once charged with the electricity of revelation, now felt oppressively still. Fanshawe stood at the center, a man reduced from the arrogance of entitlement to the bare bones of desperation. His confession hung in the air like the last lingering note of a tragic sonata. Inspector Parker stepped forward, cuffs in hand, but it was Whimsy who spoke first, his voice calm yet tinged with a subtle, almost merciful irony. "Mr. Fanshawe, it is a sad truth that passion, when entangled with fear, often leads the most respectable of gentlemen to the most deplorable of actions." Fanshawe's eyes, once defiant, now shimmered with tears. "I never meant to kill her. She found out. About the letter. About the secret. She threatened to tell everyone. I was desperate." Lady Wilbraham's face, pale but composed, softened. "Minutely. Eugenia was my niece, and in her innocence she could not fathom the ruin her revelations might bring to us all." "Ah, but Miss Wilbraham's innocence was no shield against the truth she uncovered," Whimsy remarked dryly. "And yours, Lady Wilbraham, was no guarantee of protection." Mrs. Pettigrew, still standing at the back, finally spoke, her voice low and brittle. "I only wished to protect the family's dignity. The letter was never meant to be sent. It was a cry for help, not a weapon." Whimsy nodded slowly. "And in protecting that dignity you all conspired in silence, a silence that cost a life." Fanshawe's shoulders sagged as Parker approached. "You will come with me now, Mr. Fanshawe." The man offered no resistance, his fate accepted with a grim resignation. As the household began to disperse, Whimsy lingered for a moment, looking thoughtfully at the faces around him, the shattered facade of respectability laid bare. Bunter appeared quietly at his side. "Shall I prepare the car, my lord?" Whimsy smiled faintly. "Yes, Bunter, it seems our work here is done for now." Stepping into the cool night air, Lord Peter lit a slender cigar and inhaled deeply, the sharp scent mingling with the crisp autumn breeze. "Justice," he murmured to himself, "is seldom tidy. It is a knot best untangled with patience and, occasionally, a touch of poetry." He glanced back once at the dim silhouette of Wilbraham Hall, then turned toward the dark road ahead, where new mysteries awaited. The mist had thinned to a pale whisper by morning, and Whimsy found himself once again seated by the fire in his modest London flat. The familiar scent of leather-bound volumes and smouldering tobacco curling around him like an old friend. Bunter was quietly attending to a pot of tea, their shared ritual unbroken even amid the closing of such tangled affairs. "Well, Bunter," Whimsy mused aloud, exhaling a delicate plume of smoke. "One might say that Wilbraham Hall was less a house and more a carefully constructed play, with each player masking truths as deftly as an actor conceals nerves before the curtain rises." Bunter smiled. "And yet, my lord, it was the smallest prop, the scratched salver and the open window that led you to the final act." "Indeed," Whimsy replied, archly tapping the ash from his cigar. "It is often in the minutiae that the grandest deceptions unravel. As the Roman poet Horace might have said, parturient montes nascetur ridiculus mus. When mountains give birth, a ridiculous mouse is born. A reminder that the grandest mysteries often collapse into the smallest truths." He looked thoughtfully into the embers. Poor Miss Wilbraham's tragedy was not one of villainy, but of secrets too heavy for fragile hearts. And yet, justice found its measure, not in the melodrama of scandal, but in the quiet reckoning of human frailty. Bunter poured tea and handed the cup with his usual understated efficiency. "Do you think the village will ever be the same?" "My lord?" Whimsy smiled faintly. "Villages are like novels, Bunter. Some chapters end, others begin, but the story, endlessly complicated and beautifully flawed, always goes on." He stood, extending a hand to Bunter. "Come, my good fellow. Let us prepare for the next enigma. The game, as ever, is afoot." With that, Lord Peter Whimsy, cigar in hand and intellect sharpened anew, stepped out into the soft London morning, leaving behind the whispers of Wilbraham Hall and the letter no one posted.